Here we go. Good evening, one. Good evening, all. Welcome to Data Science and Technology Meetup. Thank you all for tuning in this evening. This is a virtual version of something that we've run for a number of years now in the flesh, in Scotland, in London, and further afield. But obviously, due to the restrictions at the moment, we're doing this virtually, which gives us an advantage because we can have people from all over the world both tuning in and attending and talking. My name's Rob Huggins. I'm Client Services Director with MBN Solutions. My honour and pleasure introducing this evening a man I've known for a long time, Mr. Tony Brown. Tony delivered a kind of exclusive supper club version of this particular presentation before Christmas, very well received. So I'm absolutely delighted that he can join us this evening. And I'm even more delighted that 40 of you folks have taken the time out of your day to tune in as well. Very quick question for Tony. Tony, how long is your presentation roughly, sir?
Well, you know, the idea is it's about 30 minutes.
Okay.
I get excited, it might overrun a bit, might take a bit longer.
Brilliant. The good thing about this particular forum is that we make the rules, mate. So if you want to go longer than 30 minutes, it's all good. Yeah. So I was saying to you all when you joined this evening, please use chat for any chat amongst yourself, chat to me, chat to Michael, chat to Tony. But if it's a specific question regarding Tony's presentation, please pop it in the Q&A. The chat can get quite busy. And if we keep those questions in Q&A, it makes it much easier for me and Tony towards the end. Tony finishes his presentation after about 30 odd minutes, and then we'll dip in. And if there's any questions in Q&A, we can isolate them, we can ask them, we can debate them. Now, having been on loads of these in the past, guys, please hit Tony with some questions. He's the man with a plan. He knows what he's doing here, but you will make this thing come to life. Every now and again, if you hear something you want a little bit of an expansion on, or you've got an opinion on, pop it into Q&A, and let's keep this as interactive as possible, because trust me, having been where Tony is at the moment, it's quite hard to do a half-hour delivery to a blank screen. So the more we can bring it to life for him afterwards, the better the event will be. I think that's about it from me now, Mr. Brown. Are you ready to take over, Ton?
I think I am. Yeah, let me
Let's
just
see. Want to do a quick test and see if your slides are working okay?
Okay. Can you see my screen? There should be a slide there.
I'm not seeing anything yet, mate.
Okay. Desktop 2. Oh, I have to press the share button. There we go.
There we go. Right, I can see your screen and I can hear you loud and clear. So I'm going to mute mic and go dark now, Tony, and I will jump back on later. Folks, I'll be working away in the Q&A in the chat, and I'll catch you all at the end. Tony, floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. So thanks, Mike, and thanks, Robin, and thanks for inviting me to come and present this evening. So, you know, if anybody's expecting lots of beautiful slides that you can screen grab and use in perpetuity, I'm going to disappoint you. This is going to be mostly dialogue. I've only got 4 slides, and one of those is the one that you're looking at right now. So I'll just introduce myself. So yeah, my name's Tony Brown, Managing Director of Prickly Cactus Limited. We've actually launched our website today. We've just gone into phase 2 of our growth strategy. Sounds very grandiose, but it's not that. But yes, so Prickly Cactus, we're an analytics, data and analytics consultancy. We're mainly focused on financial services, although we do bits and pieces of work in other areas. A little bit about me and how I got here. Prior to running Prickly Cactus, I worked for 8 years for a company called Teradata, who you may or may not have heard of, global data and analytics company. I worked in the financial services consulting practice in Europe, Middle East and Africa, and also we eventually covered Asia Pacific as well. So I've worked with probably over 50 or 60 banks and insurance companies during that time. You know, built up a lot of experience from that. And later I was a vice president of product marketing and business development for their customer analytics and real-time decisioning division. And, you know, again, that gave me a massive opportunity to go and work with companies in other sectors and really get some good understanding of what happens in this space. Prior to that, I worked for Lloyds Banking Group. So I joined Lloyds Banking Group straight out of university. I did pretty much every marketing customer analytics, data-driven role that there was in the bank over the 17 years I was there. And I ended up running, probably for the last sort of 6 or 7 years I was there, I ran the distribution analytics part of the business, working out where to site branches, how many staff to have in branches, how to get people to go online and how to optimize the online experience. Then I ran the product analytics, so advising the product business units based on data and analytics, what products to launch and how to price products and so on. And then finally, the last 4 years I was there, I was the CRM, head of CRM. So I was responsible for all of our communications, inbound and outbound, across all the channels and the 4 major brands of Lloyds Banking Group. So yeah, I've got, I've always worked in data and analytics, mainly focused on financial services. But I'm not here to tell you about that. What I'm here to talk about is a white paper that I've recently written in conjunction with a company called Celebris. Now, Celebris, if you haven't heard of them, they're a technology company that basically capture data from digital applications, other websites, mobile devices, kiosks, ATMs, all sorts of different devices, and capture that data in real time, create a really nicely structured data model. They interpret the data, put it into a consistent format, and then surface it to other platforms where it can be used for analytics and decisioning. Okay, so now the reason I work with them on this white paper is that when I was at Teradata, and I'll just move on to my first slide, just make sure my screen navigation works. There we go. Right. There we go. This is slide 1 of 3, and that you don't get much more detail than this. So, yeah, when I was at Teradata, one of the roles I had was I actually managed the partnership that Teradata had with Celebris, and basically Celebris, as I said, they capture digital data that can be used to drive real-time decisions, real-time personalization, fraud analytics, all sorts of stuff. But it can also be used to drive, the big fat table that you build your predictive models from, or the big event table that you would use to do customer experience analytics, for example. And I'll come on to some of that. But one of the things that I really noticed over the time that I worked with Celebris and since leaving Teradata is that we worked, I think, probably with about 50 different companies globally. So banks, retailers, automotive, airlines, helping those organizations capture and use their digital data. And really big brands, globally known, very innovative brands. But what we saw as we helped companies capture digital data and use that to fuel their business was we saw frankly amazing results from doing that. If you can understand what customers are doing through digital channels and respond to that, use that data to fuel the way you interact with customers, you get fantastic results. And I'll come on to how the main purpose of this presentation is how those results get delivered. But aside from being a really effective way of delivering business results, one of the things that really struck me as we worked with all these different companies in different industries was that there were certain use cases that kept coming up, and there was for example some of the early projects we did in online retail. When we took the ideas that had been implemented in online retail from an analytics or decisioning perspective and tried them in financial services, retail banking, insurance, or some of those we took and used with airlines or sort of loyalty, they worked. And we got really similar results when we moved these use cases from industry to industry. And what we also saw was a lot of the organizations that we were working with, once they got going with this, they were able to innovate really, really quickly. And what that led us to seeing over time was that there was almost like a common pattern or a common journey that we saw organizations go through as they started, taking digital data, using advanced analytics, using decisioning capabilities to transform the way they interact with customers. And ultimately, and I'm talking mainly about marketing, digital, but ultimately it grew into something much bigger. So what I want to do is just step through this journey that we saw many organizations go through. And really, this is a nub of the white papers that have been published. I think somehow we'll be, if you were interested in downloading the white papers later, I don't get commission for them, but I can explain where they are, and you can get all the detail. There's actually two parts. One is more of a, what's the strategy? How do you approach it? And then there's almost like a how-to guide, which is part two. How do you embark on this journey, and what do you come across as you navigate it? It was interesting. I presented this paper about a month ago, and somebody at the end of it asked me, well, you published this paper in 2020, it's based on using data to improve the customer experience, but a lot's happened since then. COVID-19 has changed the way society functions. It's changed the way organizations have functioned. Whole industries are going to the wall as a result of COVID-19. So is this still relevant, given that it was done a year ago? And my answer was, it's actually got more relevant. So, really what we're talking about here is understanding how customers interact with digital channels, being able to personalize the experience in digital channels, and then really building out from there. And I think, there's one thing that's absolutely clear from what's happened over the last 12 months. If you look at Arcadia Group, Oasis, Debenhams, Jaeger, a whole bunch of different retail brands that were really bricks and mortar based brands and very weak in terms of digital presence. Well, they've got into administration, they've closed, and the assets are being picked over right now. Other organisations that were kind of a hybrid, TM Lewin's probably a really good example. They've been forced to close all their stores. They're moving to becoming purely online. They actually had a reasonably good online presence to start with, and they've been able to adapt to the changes that have happened. But in other industries, in banking, which is my home ground, one of the things that happened very early on when the COVID pandemic struck and the country went into lockdown in the UK, at least, was that bank branches had to close during the first lockdown, and lots of customers that were using branches, and there may not be many of them on this call, but there are a lot of people still around that use bank branches. They couldn't, they didn't have access to branches. A lot of them were unfamiliar with or unable to access digital for one reason or another. So basically, most of the banks, the call centers just couldn't cope. And they all put different badges on it, failure demand and so on. But basically, they just were not ready. And what they've realized is that we really, really have to get digital done. We have to make sure every customer can access digital services. Digital transformation has been a high priority for most organizations for the past 15 years. I don't think there's been really good progress in actually making that happen in a lot of legacy organizations. So the banks suffered, and now they're realizing that the website, the mobile device is not just another channel. You have to be able to rely on that almost entirely, otherwise the business breaks. And then if you take it to the other extreme, I've talked about the bricks and mortar retailers, I've talked about the omni-channel banks who are sort of halfway. And then you've got companies like ASOS, share prices up 56% in the last 12 months. That was as of yesterday. Amazon is up 71%, as if it wasn't valuable enough already as an organization. So those truly digital native organizations have really, really benefited from this. So in a nutshell, this is about data-driven transformation. The focus is around the digital side of that, digital data, digital analytics, digital experience, and it is massively important right now. So without further ado, what I want to do is just go through and just explain what this journey is. Now, this journey, as I said, through my time at Teradata, when I was working there, working alongside Celebris with over 50 different brands globally, we spotted this pattern quite early on. And then last year, I'd left Teradata at that point. I was working independently. Celebris commissioned me to write this paper. So I went out and actually interviewed quite a few of the companies that we'd worked with, some of them remotely, some of them face to face when we were still allowed to do it. And you know, got them to input into this model, but also got them to validate it. You know, we also work with some of the key industry analysts from Gartner and from Forrester as well to put this model together and validate it. So let me step through the journey, and let's, you know, literally go through it. So as I said, you know, we're talking about turning data into value, capturing digital data. We've got organizations that are going through this evolution. And what I want to do is just step through it. And it's, you know, you could call it a journey, you could call it a maturity model. You know, it's actually a really useful framework that I use within my business. If I'm looking at an organization, I'm trying to work where they are, understand where they are from an analytics and data perspective, and understand what the opportunity is. So, you know, Prickly Cactus, we're focused on helping organizations put together a data and analytics strategy that enables them to achieve their corporate strategy. And you know, one of the key tools in that is what we'd call a capability assessment. And this framework is one of the inputs into that. So you know, step one, or you know, stage one of this maturity model, if you like, you know, we sort of avoid using elaborate labels, because, you know, I'm not that fussy, to be honest. But you know, what we're talking about here is organizations that are very channel focused or product focused. They're trying to do very simple things with data. They're relatively immature in terms of analytics capability. And you know, although the technology used here and the capability here is quite advanced, you know, some organizations just want to do really simple things with it because it still generates a massive return. So organizations at stage one are channel or product focused. And what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to explain all the technology. What I'm going to do is explain the sorts of things they do when they're at this stage, from a data and analytics perspective, i.e. use cases. So, you know, organizations at step one, you know, they're focused on things like visitor retargeting, right? So a customer or a visitor comes to your website, they browse a number of different things, and then they leave, okay? Now, it could be an anonymous customer, but, you know, in many of the businesses that we work with, these customers are not anonymous, they're logging in. So if they're a banking customer, they're logging into the internet banking site or the mobile app. If it's an online retailer, then they're logging in and browsing different products. And if it's, you know, if it's a airline, for example, it might be a customer that comes in and searches for different flights, or, you know, is reviewing different travel options. So the first use case, really simple one, is retargeting. And, you know, the whole you know, a lot of the programmatic advertising industry runs on retargeting, right? You know, customer does this, let's send them a message or a digital advert to offer that. Okay. Now, the subtle difference here is that it's using that digital data like the digital advertisers were, but it's using the fact that we know this is a customer, right? So you know, a really simple use case would be, and there was a bank that we work with in Southeast Asia, in Taiwan, in Greater China, actually, in Taiwan. And you know, one of the early use cases there was, you know, we started capturing all the digital data. They were looking at visitors coming to their website, browsing credit cards and loans and various products, and then simply using that to seed audiences that they were pushing back into Facebook. So they were using that to create Facebook audiences. And what they found was that the Facebook audiences that were driven by this, you know, the interaction data, had about a 3 to 5, depending on the audience and the product involved, about a 3 to 5 uplift in sales conversion rate from those audiences. So, you know, obviously responding to what individuals are looking at was really, really effective. But then, you know, moving on to other things, you know, as a customer navigates a website, they might, just based on the pages they browse and where their mouse hovers on a particular offer, if they click on certain things, if they enter a search in the search bar, using that data to understand what the customer is looking for and where they are in the buying journey. And then even if they don't log on, even if they remain anonymous, using that to target the messages. So an insurance company that we work with in Europe, they were doing absolutely this. They were using a very well-known advertising model called AIDA, Attention, Interest, Desire, Action. Looking at browsers on the website based on where they go on the website. Are they just new to the brand? Are they interested in a certain product? Do they have serious intent to buy that product? So do they go in and start researching the features? Or, you know, are they attempting an application, you know, retreating, getting a quote or something? And based on the products they're looking at, where they are in the journey, they were then serving up content on the page in real time to, well, not even in real time, when they come back or later in the session. And again, that drove up their overall digital sales by about 15%. But these are, and then from an analytics perspective, you know, taking that digital data and saying, right, when customers visit the website, where do they go? What do they do? Do they successfully complete processes that they start? Do they drop out? Why do they drop out? What's the root cause? So using customer journey analytics, path analytics, whatever label you want to stick on it, user experience analytics, those techniques with the data to really understand how well the channel's performing, and then tune it. So a really good example there, we were working with one of the UK banks who I will not name, and we found that there was a particular process that they had which had one bug. So we did some analysis using their data, and there was one bug in this particular process that was throwing 88% of customers out of the process. And then obviously some of those customers would try a second time to get through, they'd hit the bug again. Sometimes a customer would come back 3, 4, 5 times to try to get through this process. And overall, only about 20% of people that attempted to get through this process successfully did so. And it came down to one bug with one field on one page. And when that was fixed, 100% of customers were able to complete it in one step. So just using that digital data, looking at a really simple single channel process, we were able to completely re-engineer it through a small tweak and deliver a massive improvement in customer experience. And we found tens of issues like that across their website and mobile applications. So the key thing here is that we're typically looking at one channel. How is the unauthenticated, you know, the public website working? How is the authenticated website working? You know, how can we change the experience in, you know, how can we personalize the messages on there and retarget individuals, or how can we change that process so it works much better? And it's using data, and it's using analytics, and it's using decisioning, but really, really super simple use cases. But the key thing here is that the organizations that we did work with that were still at that early stage, you know, got really, really fantastic results from deploying these analytic use cases that will probably only take weeks or maybe a couple of months to get up and running. And then really quickly their ambition would grow, and then they would move on to stage 2. Okay, so stage 2 is where they start thinking more from a customer perspective rather than a single channel or a single product perspective. And organizations at step 2 are still looking at very similar things. Now, we always tended to come in from a marketing or customer experience or digital angle, because those were the parts of the organization we were working with. And that's where the use cases were. But you know, then the use cases got ever so slightly more sophisticated, but from a customer perspective would feel much better. So at stage 2, this customer level, if you take, you know, in stage 1, I talked about retargeting. You know, somebody looks at product A let's retarget them with a message about product A. You know, in this example, there was an online retailer that was taking that to another level. So they were issuing newsletters, which were vanilla. So everybody, you know, they probably have some basic segments like, you know, female fashionistas and, you know, older gentlemen, and, you know, sort of, I'm making the labels up, as you can probably tell, but very basic segmentation. And they would send newsletters that would align to each of those. And what we did for them was help them, through the insights they were gathering, really personalize down to an individual level. So the next time that customer, so real example, there was one customer when they first started working on the data, and they gave her a fictional name of Jennifer, and she'd looked at this particular pair of replay jeans something like 63 times over a 3-week period, and on the day they they basically launched a sale, and this particular pair of replay jeans were 65% off. So at something like 6:30 in the morning on the day this particular pair of jeans appeared in the sale, she put them in a shopping basket, digital basket, and bought them. And it, you know, that one example that got them thinking, well, how many other Jennifers are there? Can we identify what it is that customers really want? So when we send that newsletter, instead of sending the same newsletter to 100,000 customers, let's have the product they're looking at. Let's have 3 or 4 products that are most similar to that, that, you know, using a graph analysis to identify the next best product. And let's, instead of sending 100,000 of the same newsletter, let's send 100,000 individual newsletters, and we use data to personalize each of them. And that's what they did. And they also took the same approach with their email campaigns. So they were sending a lot of, you know, email offers, which were very generic, you know, segment level. You know, and a lot of marketers think segmentation is great, but personalization is better. Hyper personalization is even better. So, you know, by driving this individual level customer insight into the communications they were sending out through email and newsletter, and which was also an email, funnily enough, and by putting those messages in, putting those same offers in front of the call center agents when the customer called in, they got, depending on the communication and the product area, the revenue per email, which was how they measured their performance, increased by 8 to 32x. So that's 800% to 3,200% increase in return on investment for their email campaigns. And we took that exact use case, right? Customers looking at a particular product, but not going through with the purchase. We were working with another retail bank, and we said, this works really well in retail, you should try it too. And they did, and they generated about $15 million of revenue in the first 12 months of doing it. And it was just one use case, personalizing around what an individual has done, and it works really, really well. I'm going to run over. and then you know, using, and then the next stage, really, you know, that's all from a marketing and decisioning perspective. But then the other thing that these organizations at stage 2 start to do is, you know, let's redesign, let's understand how the sales process and the service processes work and redesign them. But let's make sure they work if a customer goes cross-channel. If a customer starts something online and then calls the call center, let's make sure that's joined up. Let's use this digital data in our propensity models to make better predictions about what customers want to buy next. And you know, I'm already running out of time, so I'm not going to go into detail, but we did lots of projects like that. Or, you know, if we see that a customer, so one of the organizations we work with sent out catalogs. So they were a catalog business at one point, and they became more of a digital online business, but they were still hooked on sending out about 60 or 70 million pounds worth of catalogs every year. It was really expensive, and every time they tried to stop doing it, you know, take some of those catalogs away, the sales numbers dropped. But again, you know, by understanding which of their customers were just shopping online and which ones were using the catalog even if they were going online, which you're able to do from the data, and I won't explain how, they were able to strip about 50 million of cost out of the business every year, and taking a very customer-centric approach. So that's step 2, more advanced versions of level 1, but more customer-centric. And then really, the next step is this moving to real time. And this is where, and this, in some of the early projects we did, it happened by accident. So we had an insurance company over in Scandinavia that I worked with very closely, and they were at step 2. So they were looking at customers that were abandoning an online insurance quote. So they're doing a home insurance quote or a motor insurance quote, and then they leave the website. And then what they were doing was getting that data and using it to phone the customer up. Now, initially, they were doing it the following day, and they were getting about a 10 or 15% conversion rate, which was good enough for them, for the cost of the call and the premium that they got. It was good enough for them, and they were really happy with that performance. But during when we were doing some work with them, an innovation, we call it an innovation workshop. So we were doing a workshop with them to brainstorm different ideas, different ways of using the data. And one of the things that we recommended was that they test recontacting the customer quicker. So don't wait until tomorrow. Can you get that data into the call center within a few minutes and make the call? And they ran a really small pilot, and the conversion rate went from 15% to 60%. And more than that, the call center agents that were involved in the pilot were just blown away, because they said, wow, yesterday we were calling these customers and 85% of them weren't interested. They'd already bought from a competitor, etc. And then when you gave us the leads today and we started phoning the customers, we'd speak to the customer and say, hello, I'm from XYZ Insurance, and I'm calling about the quote that you just ran on our website. Can I help you finish it? And the individual would turn around and say, wow, I'm just getting a quote from elsewhere. And they were able to stop them mid quote on a competitor's website and bring them back. So that move to real time was 4 times more effective than the really, really personalized stuff they were doing already. And again, we took that example from insurance. We did a huge digital transformation program for one of the biggest banks in the world. And we implemented this real-time capability. And by being able to respond to what customers are doing in real time, their on-site banners in the internet banking website, the response rates, click-through rates on those increased by 50 to 70x. By being able to respond by sending an email back to a customer instantly that they've done something, they got about a 15% uplift in conversion through those emails. And then through the on-site personalization and real-time decisioning across the other channels, within 2 years, they were making $100 million a year by moving to real time. They weren't doing anything that they weren't doing at step 2. They were just doing it in real time, $100 million a year in incremental sales. At this step, you are looking at investments in technology to make everything work in real time and so on. But the return on investment is just incredible. So that's stage 3. And stage 4, you'll be glad to hear stage 5 is very quick. I've got nothing to say about stage 5, but stage 4 is the one, is the big one right now, because it's within reach. And stage 4 we've called it enterprise, because stage 1, 2, and 3 that I've stepped through are mainly focused around marketing, customer experience. And that was, as I've explained, that was just because of the way we were working. But what happens in some of the organizations we work with, and I talk about it in the white paper, but I would say less than 10% of organizations have actually made it to step 4. But in some of them, and the last bank that I just talked about is a good example of this, the head of analytics that was running this particular program at stage 3 got promoted up to take an enterprise role. So instead of being in charge of marketing analytics, he's now in charge of analytics across the whole group. And of course, analytics isn't just marketing. It's fraud analytics, it's risk analytics, it's pricing, and it's a whole raft of other things. And organizations that are getting to step 4 are realizing if I get some data in one part of the organization and I can use that in that part of the organization successfully, then there's a really good chance that I can use it to do other things. So quick few examples. The online retailer that was doing the Jennifer thing, she's looking at a particular pair of jeans, she's not buying them. Next time I talk to her, I'm going to talk about those jeans and other similar ones. Well, if somebody tries to put something in a basket, and at the point they put it in the basket, it says, oh, sorry, we're out of stock in that size. Well, 2 things. When it comes into stock, I'm going to tell Jennifer that they're back in stock, get her to come back. But the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and speak to my supply chain management team and say, do you know what? We've lost, 1,000 sales of this product because it's out of stock. We need to adjust the algorithms and so on. So that insight, that digital data for marketing is now being used for supply chain and optimizing, the amount of merchandise that we've got. If we look at the way the customer, we're trying to personalize some offers on our website. We're an airline, and we can see that people are searching certain locations or certain types of trip. Then we're going to personalize the experience around that. But if we know that somebody has searched a trip, they're researching a trip, and they've submitted 6 or 7 different scenarios, but it's always I want to fly from here to here on this date. Then we know that they're not really flexible around date, which means they're going to have to be flexible around price. So there's one airline that I've worked with who are using this to, and you might not like it, but they are using this kind of behavioral data to understand how price elastic different passengers are. And that's enabling them to, on average, add a dollop of, it's a US airline, they're averaging adding on average $1 per flight by using this. That might not sound a lot, but when you're doing 100 million flights per year, it's a lot of money. And that was the initial easy, simple analytics way of doing it. And they're getting more and more sophisticated. And then, one of the, I'm actually working on a project at the moment around fraud, because obviously fraud is a huge problem. Digital fraud in particular, account takeover, new account fraud, and so on. And one of the banks that we work with, again, using the data for marketing, but then they said, well, actually, if we can see how the customers navigating the website, how they move their mouse across the screen, how they hold the phone, and so on. And I won't say on a public forum what the signals are, but there are certain signals in there which tell you whether or not this is a genuine customer, or whether it's a remote account takeover, somebody using a dialing tool to actually take control of the customer's screen and take over the account, or whether it's a fraudster who's committed identity theft and is trying to now get into the account. So there are behavioral patterns that emerge. So at step 4, we're talking about breaking out of marketing. Now, it might have been we started in another area, now we're going across, but the use of this data, the use of the analytics, the use of the decisioning capability is enterprise-wide. And that's where the value and the return really, really comes to life. That's step 4. And step 5 is a North Star. And North Star is not a thing. It's not a particular level. It's just a vision of where the future might be. In the future, you may not speak to a person when you call the call center. You might speak to a bot that's got a human voice interface. Or it could be, when you do a Zoom call with your local bank, you're actually speaking to a virtual advisor rather than a human one. This is where it goes. And that requires data. It requires seamless real-time decisioning and understanding, voice recognition, all the advanced AI, and whatever that looks like, if you want to get there, then a lot of these fundamental blocks that you put in place, the ability to listen to what the customer's doing in real time, the ability to analyze, what their needs are and what they're asking for, and then respond to that with a personalized message. All of those building blocks lead in to being able to achieve this sort of virtual experience. And love it or hate it. I'm quite excited by it because it means people can go and do more interesting jobs. But lots of companies are now experimenting with bots. A lot of them are very crude. They've got a long way to go, but they're experimenting with them. And virtual agents. So one of the banks I've worked with has actually created their first virtual agent that's got a face, and sort of AI techniques to drive into that. So that's the journey that we go on, and there's value to be delivered. There's an improvement in the customer experience as you go through this journey. Organizations become more effective and better able to compete in their respective markets. So last slide, and I'll try and whip through this really quickly actually. What gets in the way? Well, the short answer is it isn't technology. There is, all the technology is there, has been there for a while actually, to be able to do most of this stuff. There's nothing, there's nothing that's impossible from a technical perspective. The thing that really leaps out, and when we went and spoke to the organizations that took part in the survey, consistently they told us the number one issue was organizational. And it was a lack of passion or vision or culture or bad processes or siloed thinking, siloed mentality that was holding organizations back. So on one hand, you have these short-term, you've got short-term thinking. People are only in job, like presidents, as we know, luckily are only in jobs for 4 years. But people want to get stuff done during their tenure. So, that was cited as a reason. The chief marketing officer and the chief fraud officer and the chief technology officer have all got different objectives. They won't play together nicely. These are the things that get in the way. But what that means is that organizations then, they're only thinking about their part of the world. They're only thinking maybe one step ahead. What can I get done this year or within 18 months so that I look good when I move on to the next role? They're not taking the longer term role. Now, this is one extreme, by the way. This isn't everybody, but it is a common problem. So, they build solutions that are good enough for today's problem, but don't think about longer term because it's too difficult. They're working in a silo. And what's worse here is that if lots of people behave like that, over here in marketing and over there in fraud, we're actually building the same thing. They're using it for different purposes, but they're building the same thing. I was thinking of a good analogy for this, and I think it's, I live in Bristol, and in Bristol we have two fantastic bridges that are able to take us across into Wales. And one of them was built in the 60s. It's still going. And when that bridge was built, I was drawing an analogy between data engineering and engineering. When that bridge was built, it wasn't built to carry a mini and 100 minis an hour. It was built to carry all the cars that were available at that time, motorcycles, pedestrians, yes, you can walk across it, heavy goods vehicles, coaches, buses, etc. And it was built in such a way that over the years, it continues to do the same job. Even today, you can go over that bridge with any vehicle. And when I see some of the projects that I've been on, and I see the way they're designing data pipelines or data models or data platforms, and I think you're building that for this one problem, but there's another problem over here or another problem coming down the line. It's not going to work for that. So you really need to build. Now, you don't have to solve the whole problem in one go, but you definitely have to build with the future in mind. So that's the issue that organizations face. And at the other end, on the right-hand side of this, you've got people that, are looking longer term. They are thinking about how the whole organization might benefit. They're building, they're definitely building to solve today's problem, and they can solve today's problem really, really quickly, but they've also got one eye on the future. And if I build this today, is it going to help me do something different tomorrow? And what that does, rather than the short-term view, which it may feel quicker if you build a quick and dirty solution, but actually if you keep having to do that in perpetuity, it slows you down. Whereas over on the right-hand side, a bit more effort in that first project or the second project means that the third, fourth, fifth projects get easier. And this is one of the things that is really, really important when thinking about your roadmap, what you're doing with analytics, etc., and the future. So that's what gets in the way. It's not the data, it's not the analytics, it's not the technology. It's basically the way organizations think and the time and the care they take over building, analytics and data that are going to support the organization into the future. So I had 3 tips, 3 takeaways I was going to leave. I had a cautionary tale as well, but I'm not going to cover that. But 3 tips. It's always good to have 3s, isn't it? Start with why. There's a very famous management guru called Simon Sinek, does a fantastic YouTube video on start with why. And start with why. If we're tackling any data or analytics project, start with why you're doing it. And you're not doing it to build a data set or to build a new model. You're doing it to change the customer experience, or you're doing it to beat the fraudsters, or you're doing it for some other reason. What's the business outcome you're trying to drive? Because if you get business outcomes quickly and early on, that builds sponsorship to do the next thing and the next thing. And the team I worked in at Lloyds, when we first put that team together, there were 30 of us. Within 5 years, there were 200 of us. And it was because we took this approach and we delivered results and we got sponsorship to grow. How many more people do you need? So start with why. Think ahead. I've already talked about this, but how might you solve tomorrow's problems with what you're building today? And you don't have to necessarily solve tomorrow's problems today, but you have to build with them in mind, because that will build momentum. And then, the third and final thing is, and I'm guilty of not doing this all the time, work together. The third thing is work together. So there are other areas of the business, it doesn't matter who you work for, there will be other people in your business that are trying to do very similar things, maybe for a very different outcome, but they're trying to do very similar things. Don't reinvent the wheel. Learn from those other areas and build less, deliver more, is what I would say. So those would be my 3 tips. So at that point, having massively overrun, I'm going to stop and open it for questions.
No massive overrun, Tony. Remember, it's our rules. You can go on as long as you like, fella.
Well, I work in a regulated industry. We follow rules.
Mate, listen, we've got 2 bits of good news. Firstly, we still have over 50 people tuned in to hear the pearls of wisdom, sir. And the even better news, I've had a quick look through the Q&A. There are some amazing questions in there for you, fella. So I'm reckoning based on the timeline we originally proposed, we've got another half an hour, just a bit of free forum, freestyle. I'm going to kind of read the questions through to you, mate, if you're cool with that. It'll help recording, because somebody might be watching this, they might not be able to see. But let's get cracked off with the questions, mate. So the first one here's from Jerry. Jerry, thanks very much, mate. Hi, Tony. Other than allowing for customers' marketing and privacy preferences, what impact, if any, do you see on the journey you describe from having to comply with GDPR and any other future data privacy regulations?
I could be really cheeky and say absolutely none. And the reason I could be cheeky and say it now, it's a bit of an exaggeration, because there's more work to do. But prior to GDPR, there was a thing called the Data Protection Act. And from a privacy perspective, they were actually remarkably similar. If you go and look at the 2 bits of regulation, the bit that GDPR added was the right to access your own data, the right to erasure, the right, portability, all that good stuff was added by GDPR. But from a privacy and consent perspective, the Data Protection Act that predated that was actually very similar. And when I was at Lloyds and then later working with other clients, I had to go through this time and time again. The key thing is GDPR allows you to use data for the purposes for which it was collected, and you have to gain consent to do that. So it's, I know it's not simple to execute on, but the simple thing is you go and get consent and you explain to your customers in your terms and conditions, in your consent clauses, what you're going to do with that. And you know, there's kind of two sides to this, because you've got, for marketing customer experience, you absolutely have to get explicit consent. So you have to build that into all your processes. You know, when customers come to your website, when they come to the call center, if you haven't got consent, you ask for it. You give them the opportunity to opt out. And it's just a process that you have to embed in all your touch points. I'm not saying that's easy, but it's simple, really. But then on the other side, there are certain aspects of analytics, or certain aspects of the business you don't need consent. So things like fraud, for example, you've got legitimate interest. So even if the customer doesn't give you consent to collect and process, you can do it anyway, because you're using it to fight crime. So what I would say is that for GDPR to work, you put in place the infrastructure to be able to collect everything, and then you collect consents, and you put your terms and your customer T's and C's in place to explain what those consents are really clearly, and you make it really easy for customers to opt in and to opt out, and then you make sure you use that data to treat your customers well, and then they will give you consent. Just one stat I'll throw at you. There was a piece of research done by Accenture last year, I think it was, or it might be even been 2019. Remember 2019? And they found that 86% of customers, when asked whether they would give permission to share their data if it meant they got a better experience, they said yes. 86% of customers. So GDPR, super important, because you've got to comply, otherwise you'll get a massive fine. But you know, the principles are really simple. Get consent, collect everything, and then you know you only use the full data set for legitimate interest and the consent data set for marketing. But I'm not a lawyer, so don't quote me on it.
What would your idea be about how do you handle personalizing content on a digital channel that also has a broadcast channel in the mix?
Right. Okay. So they've watched it on a broadcast channel?
Yeah. So for example,
yeah, no, I get it. That is a very difficult one. I mean, you know, if you've got visibility into that, then you know it's really simple, isn't it? Because you look at what the last you bring together the visibility of what the customer's been doing, what the viewer's been doing across all those different platforms, and then you use that to trigger a consistent recommendation that goes back into all your communication channels. That's the principle. So, you know, this is step 2 on my journey. But you know what you're talking about there is a gap. So I'm guessing that in that question, you know, I can see what's been viewed on the, you know, the mobile app, you know, but I can't see what's been viewed live to air. So I've got a gap in my recommendations. I would, you know, I think if you've got a, God, that's a really difficult one. I'll disappear right down into the weeds with the answer here. But I think that comes back to almost like question, I think it was question 2, where, you know, what level of personalization do you apply? So, you know, if you know that somebody is watching a particular series, then, you know, clearly what you want to do is draw them back to so that they continue to watch that series. But if you know there are gaps, I mean, you could model it. So we did some work for, actually they did have all the data, but we did for one of the big comms companies, Sky, Virgin Media, BT, one of those. And you know, we were able to see what the customer had viewed through the set-top box data, and then drive a recommendation. The difference here is that if you've got gaps in what you can see, then you just have to dial back the recommendation to some extent. But I think there's also ways of identifying, knowing where those gaps are. So, you know, if you've got customer viewing episode 1 and then going straight to episode 4 on the mobile device, obviously you can step them ahead. But you know that individual is watching multi-platform. But if you've got individuals that are only watching, you know, and you could use analytics to identify somebody that's only watching through the app, then you might treat them differently. You might take the gamble and make a recommendation, knowing that you're going to get it wrong 10% of the time. So it's really down to it, understand the individual and responding to that.
Okay, so moving on, we've got Brian here who said, Andy's just said, good answer to a mere of a question, thanks. Good effort, sorry.
I talk to you about it.
So coming back to Brian here, so he said here, look, asking before Tony finishes his slides, always a danger. Point one, do you have any examples of data-driven or decision-driven approach changing an organizational strategy during the journey? For example, what the organization wanted to be. How were early indicators determined?
Wow. God, I've got one example. It's really old, and I don't even know if it's relevant. See, often in my experience, organisations change strategy because the existing strategy has just completely failed, or because somebody new comes in right at the top and they just decide they want to put their stamp on things. So in those examples, it's quite obvious. There's no analytics here, but yeah, it depends on what level of strategy. I mean, a good example. I remember years ago when I was working at Lloyds, and we did a piece, and this was, blimey. I apologise for using such an old example, but I think it's probably a good one. It must have been 2002, 2003. And retail banking was doing really badly, so weren't hitting our sales numbers. The business was performing really badly, and we did have the dot-com bubble that burst, and the economy wasn't doing too well, but we were just underperforming. And at the time, I was running what was called distribution insight. So our job was to use data to set sales targets in the branches. Oh, ooh, nasty sales targets. But that's what we were doing. And we had a number of jobs, recommending where to site ATMs. Unfortunately, one of them was which branches to close or co-locate. But anyway, as part of doing that work, we used to, we always used to take. I had a really great team of guys and gals at the time, and we used to take time out to think, what could we do differently? What else could we do with this data we've got and these techniques that we're trying out? And one of the things that we were able to do, we did a piece of analysis where we did two things. One was we chopped up the country into hexagons, and then we built a footfall model. And footfall models, classically, you build this inverse gravity model, they're called, and they're rubbish. They're really blunt instruments, so they don't work. And we had some ideas about how to do it in a more intelligent way, because in America you've got the grid system, and basically everything goes north and west in terms of roads, so it's pretty predictable how people travel. But in the UK we've got rivers and bendy roads and all sorts of nasty stuff going on. So we built, and then you've got sort of conurbations and so on. We built this model, and what we identified was that the branch network was structured really badly. So you'd have 10 branches reporting up into a director that were sort of overlapping in terms of their footfall and their catchment area with another 10 branches over here. So we had different directors fighting out over the same patch, and we knew we could sort that out by just restructuring the business. Then we did a piece of analysis that showed that when you set targets, if you do it in the wrong way, and they were doing it in the wrong way, some branches would just massively underperform because they had no chance of hitting their targets. And then other branches that had easy targets would just slowball everything and underperform because they knew they could bust their targets really easily. So they just took the foot off the gas and achieved their bonuses. And so we found we had the wrong structure, we had the wrong targets, and that was just two examples. And I remember we were luckily I had an audience with the guy that ran UK retail banking at the time about a different project, and something came up in the meeting, and it was just luck that he said, I've got a real problem here about such and such. And I said, oh, we've been doing some work on that. And I sort of span my laptop round, showed him about 3 or 4 slides, and his face dropped. and he said, "Oh God, this is it. You've got the answer. I've got the question. I didn't know what to ask, and you've already answered it. We need to do this." And we ended up completely restructuring the branch network. We completely rebuilt the way all the sales targets were set. And the following year, our sales performance grew by 30%. And the year after that, it grew by about another 40%. And that was a really long answer, but I think the short answer is keep thinking out of the box, keep thinking about how else, and you know, you've got to build in time to go and investigate these ideas. And we, you know, I think it's a friendly crowd. That team was my first senior management role, so I had it's quite a small team, and luckily everybody in the team, guys and gals, enjoyed a beer. And every, you know, this was 20 years ago, so we were allowed to do it. Every Tuesday and every Friday, we would go to this particular pub by the office, have a couple of pints, discuss, you know, crazy ideas of what to do with data, and then we come back to the office. And quite a few of my peers, and in fact, it got raised with my boss at one point by one of my peers, who I didn't like anyway, basically dobbed me in and said, "Oh, take into his team to the pub twice a week on a lunchtime. It's not appropriate." And my boss just turned around to him, this other guy, and said, "Yeah, and Tony's ideas are coming up with tons of new ideas and they're delivering lots of value." And he tells me all the ideas start in the pub. So they're carrying on. And now, whether it's the pub or whether it's some other mechanism, take time out. Think about all the crazy ideas. You know, have enough time, and I know it's not easy, have enough time to just explore, prototype some of those ideas using data, using analytics. And, you know, it might be that you get a chance, you get in front of somebody really senior that's got, you know, if you find a problem, somebody will have already got that problem. And it's just a matter then of taking that idea in and saying, this is how we fix it.
I think the next question might be a slightly shorter answer. Rennie asks, what platforms would you recommend to do data analytics for SMEs? There's some suggestions here. So Google Data Studio, Power BI, R. On SMEs here, mate, what do you recommend? What platforms? I mean, what platforms have you used that have been most effective in the past? What are you using at the moment? What do you think might be most effective in future? Let's have a 3-stage answer, please.
It's going to be less than that. It's a chicken shit answer. And my chicken shit answer is, what are the platforms that your people are most familiar using?
For courses.
Yeah, I've literally been through so much pain over the years trying to buy new technology and implement it, and it goes wrong because people don't want to use it, don't know how to use it. It doesn't, you know, all our data's over here, but the analytics tools are over here. So, you know, I would think that there's basically centers of gravity. What's the skill set center of gravity? Nowadays, if you're hiring people, it's R and Python.
Yeah.
And what's the data center of gravity? It might be a data where, you know, it might be SQL Server, or it might be Azure, or it might be, and go where the data is. Take the tools that you're familiar with to where the data is and go with that. And I'm going to say no more than that.
Brilliant, mate. Well, listen, the next one up, I really like this next question. So, Colin, thank you for this. Do you think that the increase in VPN usage, virtual private network usage, by consumers cause serious concerns for the effectiveness of user data and related personalised marketing? 5 years ago, I couldn't have told you what a VPN was. Now, 1 in every 2 of my mates is using one. I'm thinking about doing one myself. What impact is that going to have on personalisation?
That's a very good question. Personalisation, it implies you know who the individual is because they've logged in and they've authenticated. Certainly the company that I was talking about earlier, Celebris, it has no impact because we can still see who that individual is. There are certain things you won't see, or when somebody's coming in through a VPN, certain things that you see are different. But, you know, if you're talking about customer, i.e. somebody that's coming and they've got an identity and they have to go through an authentication process, it doesn't really matter. You know, if you're talking about just visitors who are not known, yes, it does have an impact.
Do you think that will have any impact on personalised marketing, or would the personalised marketing be specific to customers rather than visitors?
Well, personalised marketing, for me, the way I work, the way I think, if it's personalised, it's an individual. You know them, you know who they are, you can identify them, and VPN doesn't change that. So if I used to, in the previous job I had, I used to spend probably about 30% of my year overseas. So I had, God, what was it I used to use? Tunnel Bear. Don't even know if it still exists. Tunnel Bear on my iPad, because I couldn't watch iPlayer in any other country than the UK, and I used to find it really annoying. So, I could access the BBC website. Now, I know for a fact that the BBC use a solution called ForgeRock for identity management and authentication. If I come in through a VPN, BBC will let me view the program because it thinks I'm in the UK, but it would also know who I am because I will have authenticated by handing over my email address and my password to get in. That overrides the VPN.
Okay. So Brian again has asked, crystal ball time. What new decisions will organisations be making in the future, and what data needs to be worked? I have a wide-ranging question.
Well, I hinted at it with my North Star, and I do think that increasingly a lot. Obviously this massively varies by industry. I've a very good friend of mine used to work at the University of Dundee, analysing the mutation of proteins and looking at how that drives cancer. And I think about COVID-19, and I think about what my colleague used to do, and I think the world has woken up to the seriousness of diseases, and I think there's going to be a huge amount of investment and in data around how diseases mutate, how you develop vaccines, and there's already a lot going on, but I think that's going to be huge. Genomics, genetics, I can't even say it. Proteinomics, is it? I think that's a potentially huge growth area. But in some of the more traditional industries, I mean, if you look at the banks, telcos, that have got physical presence, I mean, it's everybody knows that the high street is dying. It's going to become much more. I think the high street is going to be much less about stuff and much more about experiences. So you won't go to the high street to buy stuff anymore. You'll go to the high street to
have an experience,
get your nails done or whatever. Get some kind of experience. So I think that whole drive to for some of the sort of traditional industries, like telecommunications, banking, and so on. I see lots of organisations playing with virtualization, with AI, with and AI is such a broad term, and everybody means a different thing by it. But I see this virtualization, I would call it. How do we virtualize the customer experience, and I think ultimately a lot of frontline jobs are going to the aim would be to replace expensive human beings with one machine that can be 100 or 1,000,000 human beings at once and deliver services virtually. So
Sarah's got a comment on this that kind of follows on from what you're talking about there. So I'm going to jump in right now, mate. So what are your thoughts on opportunities for work and sense of purpose if current high-touch roles are replaced by technology? How do we handle that transition for social cohesion? So we're off here somewhere, mate, but it's on that track that you were on.
Yeah, I don't think they'll go. I just think they'll change.
They'll change, yeah.
I think they'll change. So I think, as I said, it'll be less about stuff and more about experiences. And I just, when I remember the first boss I had when I worked at Lloyds, and I don't mind telling you, it was in 1993. And he was quite an interesting character. He used to quote Socrates and various other philosophers and Newton, and he was a bit of an egghead, but he was a really good guy. And I think it was some sort of Socrates quote or whatever it was. But anyway, he morphed it into, and actually it was something I've lived by. And actually I've only been successful in it once, but he had this philosophy that you have to work to put yourself, particularly in the sort of jobs that we all do in information analytics, you have to work with the specific purpose, or with at least this side purpose, of putting yourself out of work. And I remember the first time he said it to me, I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. But he was absolutely right, because I'm absolutely convinced that 90% of the people on this call, if they were doing the job that they're doing today, in 5 years' time, they'd be bored. They wouldn't want to be doing that anymore. People move on, they want to do different stuff. So one of the things that's really important, and it really drove how we behave, because every time we got some new data, we made sure that we automated the loading of that. We had a data model, we loaded that, we automated all the ETL to do that. We made it really simple to add new fields or create new features when we were developing data sets. One of the things I did back in 1997, we had a end-to-end process, and it used to take 4 weeks to build a propensity model to predict if a customer was going to take a personal loan or credit card or whatever it was. 4 or 5 weeks work. And I remember the first time I sat down, I joined the team, and I looked at this process and I went, this is shite. I said, this isn't 4 weeks, this is 2 weeks max. And they all looked at me and went, no, don't. This is like, this is keeping our jobs. And I just refused to take it. And I just went through, automated all the code. It was like a big SAS library, automated lots of it. Later, somebody much better at SAS than me came in and got it down even further. But all that happened was, instead of building, 6 or 7 models a year, I was able to build about 20. Then there were enough of these models around for them to actually be taken seriously and used. And then within 18 months, they were saying, right, okay, we don't need to build models anymore. We got enough of these. Can you go over here and implement a marketing optimization system? Can you write it in SAS, please? Yeah, okay. So I went off and did some, and my career just went like that. And I, all the people that I worked with in that team that worked under this guy called Lewis Hyatt had exactly the same mindset. This team that I joined, we merged with another bank, and they didn't think like that. But when it was TSB, but once we got going, people realised that if you can get rid of today's work, you can do other stuff. I mean, I doubt anybody on this call has got enough spare time in their day to play and do stuff as much as they want to, go and explore and innovate and try new things. And that's why, put yourself out of work, automate, make everything really simple. And then give yourself time to go and do something else.
I love it. Right, another couple final questions before we head towards the half hour here. Good one from Jerry here. So have a little think about this one, Tony. Do you think that there is a minimum company size and customer base that is required to realise the sort of journey, given the volume of data required and the level of investment? So in other words, talking through your slides, stages 1 to 5, what's the kind of a minimum company size and the customer base required to make that viable, if you like?
Yeah, fair question. And yeah, I didn't explain that at the beginning. Obviously, I work for Lloyds. We had, I think, 15 million customers when I joined and about 30 million when I left, because we took over Halifax Bank of Scotland. I then went to work for Teradata, and they look after the, basically you take the Forbes global 1,000, pretty much 90% of Teradata's customers are in that segment. They're huge companies. And what I've talked about here, a lot of it is targeted at larger businesses. So SMEs, I think, right. So a lot of the right. Let me split it out. So I think a lot of the analytics around process, path analysis, understanding how well things are working, I think can kick in at quite low scale. I mean, I wouldn't say a small business could do it. I mean, my website gets like, I'm lucky if we get like 200 hits a year, right, on my website. Most of my stuff is done face to face or over the phone. So I would never practice what I preach and do it for my own company. But you know, if you're up in the sort of what I would call sort of commercial area, so if you were I don't know, a TM Lewin or a, you know, one of those brands, then you absolutely should be doing this. So minimum number of customers, I don't know. I'd say it's hundreds of thousands,
Right.
but not, you know, I think, you know, but it also depends how active those customers are. So, you know, you could have 10,000 really, really active customers that are using your service continuously, and you can do this analysis. But, you know, I would say, you know, if you're retail, if you're communications, financial services, then it's probably got to be hundreds of thousands. Probably the lowest data generating industry I work with commonly is insurance. But even in insurance, there's tons of data and it's massively underutilized. So I think the techniques will change a bit, and you know, yeah, but it is complicated. You know, real-time decisioning versus customer experience analytics. I think the numbers work slightly differently.
Okay, final question then.
But sorry, what I would say. So one of the you know, if you're going to go and buy a Teradata platform, you're looking at millions of dollars. You know, you're not going to do that as a medium-sized business. But you could get, you know, if you don't have the scale requirements, you could go and buy, you know, some AWS capacity or Google Cloud Platform or Microsoft Azure and fill your boots with that. So, you know, there's the upside to it. You've got more choice if you're a smaller business.
Yeah. Okay, so last question from Mark. So Mark's written, I work for a bank and deal with employee data.
Oh, lovely.
Human resources, one of these kind of functions.
Yep.
Is it possible to give any examples or ideas that can help different departments within a bank? So instead of the external data, it's internal data. Some ideas, and you mentioned earlier on, I think it was a performance area that you were kind of looking at earlier on, something like that.
Oh yeah, we did a whole bunch of stuff, and you know, it wasn't really HR, but you know, when I was that example that I gave when we were looking at sales performance, and we were looking, that was done at individual employee level, individual roles and what their performance was. In fact, we used a technique called data envelopment analysis, which I think Strathclyde University used to be a bit handy.
Where my son is currently studying maths.
Strathclyde. You know, they had a really good OR operational research program there when I was studying. But I was at Warwick, and we had this technique called data envelopment analysis, and we did that using staff data to help understand what the potential of staff and what the potential of branches and what the potential of regions were. And it was a really good technique because it's not theoretical, it's based on what's really happening. So if you fancy using Google to go and look up a technique you've never heard of, data envelopment analysis. It's a linear programming technique, and it's a really great way of doing staff performance analytics. That would be one example. Another example I would give, which I absolutely love, we were doing some stuff for an insurance company around insider threat and looking at abuse of systems and solutions and data and so on. And we stumbled across an example. We were looking at how insurance agents generate quotes and how efficient they were at doing it. And we stumbled across these 2 Uber insurance quotes that had been through like 1,000 iterations. It was like, what the hell is happening here? And what we found, it sparked an investigation. And what we found, so the technique here is basically you're looking for exceptions, you're looking for outliers. And actually data envelopment analysis is great because it's all based on outliers. If you're familiar with multiple linear regression and all the traditional statistical techniques, it's all about the average, it's all about the middle. But actually all the exciting stuff happens at the edges, and we call them outliers, and we typically exclude them from analysis. But data envelopment analysis uses the outliers to find best practice. And in this thing we did with the insurance agents, we found these 2 mega quotes that had been run by different insurance agents they'd been edited like 1,000 times. So what's going on here? And it turned out that both these agents who knew each other and they'd shared the idea, they'd set up an insurance quote. And basically what they'd done is they'd set up, let's say it's car insurance. And what they'd done is they'd set up a quote for like a Ferrari 458 Italia. I'm a professional footballer. I live in, a really rough bit of, you name a city. They'd set up this horrible insurance quote. I'm exaggerating for effect. And then what would happen is there was a particular policy that they got paid a lot of commission on. And what happened was the customer would come in and say, I'm looking for a motor insurance quote. And the agent would say, oh yeah, let me run some quotes for you. Now they'd run a quote on this policy that they got paid a really good commission on. And then all they would do with this other quote, which was a different policy, is they'd go in and change the name and address and phone number, or the name and the phone number, run the quote. And of course it would be, your premium is £5,000 a year instead of 500. They'd show the two quotes to the customer and say, this is the best one. And this is the next best one. And every time the customer would go, oh yeah, I'll have that one, please. And it was fraud. They were basically gaming the system to sell this policy that would give them a really high commission rate. Now, so when it comes to staff analytics, there's all the stuff around performance management, which is, I think, is really interesting. Actually, there's quite a lot you can do around employee engagement and employee satisfaction. All the stuff that works for Net Promoter Score and customer sat works for employee sat too. And you can make that really data-driven and really, really informative. And then you've got this whole insider threat, internal audit type stuff, which is not nice, but it's really interesting. I love it because it always got good war stories to tell when you've done the analysis.
Magic stuff, brilliant. Tony, that brings us to a close, mate. That's back on 7:30. Perfectly timed, sir, might I say. All I can say, Mr. Brown, thank you so much, mate. Thank you. I really do appreciate your input. I look forward to sharing a beer with you in Bristol again someday, mate, when all this craziness is over. For everybody who's joined this evening, for everybody who's put a question in there, a comment, thank you all so much. It really does mean a lot, and it helps to bring the whole thing to life. So thanks again, and I'm going to pass over to Michael to close us off for the evening.
Just a quick one. Thanks very much, Tony. That was brilliant. Always a pleasure listening to you. And same as Rob, look forward to catching up with you as soon as we can. But that was great. Really appreciate it taking the time. It was a great session. Great to see so many people tuning in. I know everyone's kind of zoomed out with video calls and all that at the moment, and so it's great to see a good audience and loads of questions. So brilliant. Thanks again, and I'll see you all soon.
Cheers. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.